Hi, my name is Kayleigh Smith, and today I'm going to present about fruits that can commonly be grown in Louisiana. So a few things today. I want to talk about selecting your fruit based on which zone you live in, a few common fruits that can be grown here, a little bit about planting and planting your fruit, a few maintenance tips, and then a few personal tips from my own experience. So first, before you choose which fruit, you want to make sure it can grow in your area. So the USDA map has a website where you can look up by zip code where you live. So most of Louisiana is within zones 8 or 9, but even within Baton Rouge, where I live, my old house was in zone 8B. My new house is in zone 9A. So even within the city, we have slightly different growing conditions. So as we've learned in class, you want the right plant in the right place. So these are some of the fruits that can be grown here. I got these from the home fruit and nut production manual that we had in class. So generally within zones 8 to 9, you want to make sure specifically where you live that it can grow in the right place. But see, these are some of my favorites here. I have at my own house, I have blueberries, citrus, fig, but in the future, I hope to grow a few more like strawberries, watermelons, some blackberries, muscadines, peaches, pears, persimmons, and plums. So before you plant, you want to make sure you plan out your garden so that your fruit can have the most success. So as far as planting goes, you want an area in your yard that receives full sun, which is 8 hours or more a day. And you also want to make sure that your soil is good. You want to have good drainage so that you avoid any problems with root diseases that can really damage your fruit, especially if you're planting trees, something long term. You want to make sure it's really good, you've got a good place picked out. You also want to do a soil test, which also one of my mistakes. I didn't do with one of them, and it's looking a little rough. But you want to test for your soil, especially if you want to grow blueberries. The acidity for blueberries is in the 4 to 5 pH range, depending on which publication you look at. And you want to try to do amendments before you plant anything, before the roots are in the ground, and get the soil as ready as you can before you put anything. And then after planting, you want to make sure you mulch. A good pine straw mulch is always good, but the mulch is going to help prevent weeds coming up. It's going to help prevent anything splashing up on the leaves that might cause a disease. A little bit about maintenance. You want to monitor often for pests and diseases. And before you treat anything, you want to make sure you identify it, especially if it's an insect. You want to make sure you have the right thing to treat it with. If it's a disease, you don't want to be spraying the wrong thing in the leaf. So avoid using excess pesticides if you don't need them. Different plants have different fertilizer requirements. The LSU Ag Center has some great publications. All you have to do is Google LSU Ag Center blueberries, LSU Ag Center figs, and more than likely you'll find something that's specific to the fruit that you want to grow. There's a wealth of information out there, even more than just fertilizer. They have lots of different suggestions for varieties that can be grown that do well in our area. Pruning, they also have pruning advice in there too. I made a couple mistakes myself that I'll talk about in the next slide here. So learn as much as you can before you put anything in the ground. A few personal tips just from citrus, since Meyer lemons are one of the least cold hardy fruits. During the freeze last year, I was worried about it, so I wrapped the trunk in bubble wrap. I put some incandescent Christmas lights on there. Ignore all the weeds in that photo. And then I also put some cloth on it and then some bricks around the bottom to really protect any cold air from getting in. It saved the citrus. Everything's fine. I've got a few lemons on it right now. So just kind of know going in what does well in your area and what precaution you might need to take to prevent any problems. The Loquat, however, did just fine in the freeze. It's more cold hardy than the citrus, I think down into the teens. And this is some ice that was on the leaf. The plant looked just fine days later. But the Loquat, I also didn't prune properly. It had the V shape in the trunk, and I learned from class if it's very close, I should have pruned one of the trunks. So I'm going to work on that, but try to avoid my mistakes and educate yourself before you put anything in the ground. So like I said, the main source was the fruit and nut production. But as far as other sources, always check out the LSU Ag Center. They've got a wealth of information. So thank you for joining me.